I call this Percy. About 52 years ago, a man amongst men named Percy lived in Hazelton. Being a First Nation fisherman, he and his family had to migrate to the coast annually to earn a living. At the time, there was an unwritten agreement between the villages and towns and the provincial government to not hire natives so that they could be used as low-cost labor in the fish canneries. I'm kind of broken-hearted, so this story will be slow coming. Every time natives were moved anywhere, it was a hazardous experience. We had to pack all the things we would need to live in the cannery and get it to the railroad station. Since we left 2 weeks earlier than the rest of the cannery workers, there were only about 10 other families at the station. The train came about 25 minutes late. We were given 10 minutes to throw all our belongings onto a cattle car and get onto the train. It left in exactly 10 minutes. Dad and my uncles were swearing, but we made it. Anything we left was too bad. We then sat in a converted cattle car. That is, wooden seats were nailed down in a box car. There was no interior paneling or decorations of any kind. This Indian car was behind a well-insulated and paneled car with padded seats. This was called the white car. This white car also held a concession stand where chocolate bars and pop were sold. Dad gave us our summer pay for being good, which was $2 each. This was a lot of money, so he had to celebrate by going to the concession stand and buying a large chocolate bar and pop. This cost 3 cents for the bar and 2 cents for the pop. Since we weren't sure whether we would be full on this or not, we just sat down in an open seat. And then the cat call started. "What stinks? Does anybody smell a nigger or an Injun?" It got louder and louder, so I said, "Wait here," to my brother and sister. I went back to Dad and told him what was going on in the other car. Then I went back to my brother and sister. Men were standing over them, hollering at them. Dad always said, "Don't run from bullshit, it will quit in time." So I sat down again. I was 7 and my brother and sister were 9 and 11. I only told you our ages so you could see how brave these men were. Not. Then the door opened. In came my dad. He wasn't very big at 5'10", but very muscular. My uncle behind him, on the other hand, was large. He looked fat, but this was deceptive. The smiles on their faces hid their purpose since they were both boxers. The first man that Dad reached still had his mouth open. Dad touched his arm, and when he turned, all he saw was Dad's fist. They took turns punching the whites. Then the other door opened. In came a giant in a conductor's suit. I said, "Dad needs help with this one." I moved across the aisle. As he passed, I grabbed a leg. My brother grabbed the other leg on the other side, since he was on that other side of the aisle. Since the big conductor was rushing, he couldn't stop. We banged against the next row of seats, but we hung on like birds on a horse's mane. Slowly the big fellow fell forward. My brother hollered, "Dad!" Percy turned, bent his knees, and brought his fist up an uppercut, seemingly from the floor. His first shot evened out the fight that followed. We were scraped off, and my head and shoulder hurt like heck. Since I was on the floor, I found my bar and rescued some of my pop, which was foaming out of the bottle, back at the rows that we left. My brother and I sat down and continued eating our bars. Our dad, Percy, and uncle finished having fun and went back to the Indian car. "Don't make us come back," my uncle shot over his shoulder. "Things can get worse." What a surprise. We were able to enjoy our bar and what was left of our pop in silence. Since this filled us up, we then went and joined our parents in the Indian car. You see that even in those days of total racism, Percy and his attitude allowed us kids in our own way to demand equality and get it. Years later, a knock came on the door. When I answered it, The giant conductor was there. I hollered, "Dad, trouble!" Percy rushed to the door only to be confronted by a smiling giant. He had brought a box of chocolates and a bottle of whiskey. He told my dad that he had retired from the railroad, and since Dad and us kids were the only good memory that he had of the people, even though he had taken a whipping, he wanted to celebrate by having a drink with Percy. The chocolates were for Mom. Dad looked at him for a moment and then invited him in. He brought out 2 glasses, and over whiskey they laughed about the old days. Dad congratulated him on staying that long on the job, and they shook hands and the big man left. After the conductor left, Dad hung his head for a moment in thought, then shook his head from side to side and laughed. He realized, as we did, that some of the whites had a heart. I had kind of felt that the conductor didn't want to hurt us kids when he fell forward, rather than just scraping us off on the other seats as he could have in order to save himself. The conductor was a class human being. My dad, I miss him. God bless his soul.